Well, I can tell you that housing should be and is a key component to any economic development strategy. If you're trying to retain or you're trying to attract, you have to make sure that you're creating an environment where people can find actual housing, and we're lacking in that, as you said before. I can tell you that we get a lot of large workforce development projects that come through the city, and it's starting to happen a lot more that these large workforce projects are also coming with a desire to create and provide opportunities for housing too. So there's a housing component to it as well. And so if we're gonna be able to retain and attract, we have to create more housing, and we also have to do it for people across the income spectrum, right? And so it's not only people who need affordable housing, low-income affordable housing. And I consider affordable housing not spending more than 30% of your income on housing. So it's middle-income folks. There's people who can afford to do market rate, but they can't find the housing either. And so if there is a demand for it, right, if there's an opportunity that we just have to meet it. I can tell you through these larger development projects, the first thing people are asking corporations and these companies is, what are you doing about housing? And so it's like automatically coming with their development projects and push to bring workforce to these, at least to our city. And so it comes all together. And we haven't found any real separation from the workforce and the housing piece. And it's vital. And if we can do it, I think, and meet that obligation, we can really succeed and get a lot of people interested in our city.
So Bob, you are last, but I have known you since my Genesee County Land Bank days. And that's because we were up there working with you guys on a land bank up in Traverse City, and you were having workforce housing issues. And I don't want to, put the date out there because it will make me seem as old as I am, but that was like 20 years ago that you guys were talking about workforce housing issues. So how is that still impacting the businesses in northern Michigan?
First, Amy, thanks for letting me go last. So I can plagiarize off my other panelists. But housing and the lack of it is one of the most difficult challenges businesses are facing up in the north. It's been that way for decades. It started with seasonal housing, seasonal employees and finding housing for them. And I know Mackinac City, we see it with the J1s and the H2Bs, but it's across the north. And Czech Republic alone has 50 beds for my summer employees. And it's grown over the last decade to now it's really difficult to find year-round housing for my staff. IT people, we're turning away more people that would love to come into beautiful northern Michigan to live because they cannot find housing. It's to the point now where we're just starting to see how it's not only affecting employees, where new businesses owners are getting older up in the north and they want to sell, but there isn't that next group of business people to come in and buy those businesses. And we aren't creating the businesses in the north right now because we just don't have the workforce. We just don't have the young people up in the north. I could go on and on.
Well, I know.
Well, you know what? I'll tell one story.
Yeah.
Okay, because you were talking about a development, and I did development about the same time we were working on Traverse City out in Little Empire, Michigan, and we developed 56 lots. And my goal, and why I wanted to be a partner with a bunch of, other do-gooders in Empire, was to create some good housing, and for my goal was to create workforce housing. And now that development is about completed. There's 50 homes. I just called one of the neighbors that I remember, selling him a lot. And out of those 50 lots, there are only 7 lots that have turned into houses that are people that actually work in the town. All the rest of the other 50 homes are second homeowners, Airbnbs, and retirees. So 7 out of 50 are people actually working. And that is across the north.
Oh, that also breaks my heart. Only 7 out of 56. Yeah.
7 out of 50. And those 4 of those were ones where we did get some county funding and we're able to keep, some control on those 4. I think 1 or 2 of those are retirees now.
In my travels across the state, I've heard from employers, from small businesses all the way up to large corporations about the need for housing and how it's impacting them. And in fact, in the Traverse City area, I've had calls with the school district, right? That is like, we're gonna build our own housing because we have no housing for our teachers. We can't attract teachers because we have no housing, so we're so desperate that we're gonna do it ourselves. Which kind of leads me to the question of, what are you guys seeing out there as far as employers getting involved in housing so far? What are those deals kind of looking like? How are they playing into that? And with that, Shannon, I'm gonna start with you.
We have quite a bit. Washtenaw County and Ypsilanti, we were lucky enough to get a large allocation of ARPA funding. Same deal. All of the homes will be deed restricted for primary residents, but we are working with the local public school systems to target, and we're leveraging philanthropic through the Ann Arbor Community Foundation to provide grants to the schools to look at teachers specifically. We got a call to model that out of Marquette Township, that the township owned, had a municipal-owned piece of property. They wanted to target that towards middle income and 80%ers, but also wanted to target first responders, hospital workers, and other large employment sectors. So we're really starting to see the dynamic of investment. In Benton Harbor, we're partnering with Habitat for Humanity, but we have a $1 million grant from the Whirlpool Corporation that will be a direct investment. So in almost every project between philanthropic and local employers, there's a need and a want to invest, as long, and we're starting to see new tools that are providing those vehicles to make it happen.
So Donald, I know there's a pretty creative P3 going on in Detroit, and I was hoping that you would talk a little bit about what's happening with the Michigan Central project.
So absolutely, and I working with a lot of corporations. It's funny because I see Laura Granum and we also have Jared on this panel. So Rocket Community Foundations and Bedrock have been instrumental to a lot of our corporate partnerships, but just an example of, because it's not only are we trying to build housing for people across the income spectrum, and this is like a main economic development driver. We really also, when people go to work here in the city of Detroit, we don't want people to leave right back out, right? It's like we need to retain them and spend their dollars and live, right? The live, work, and play is a serious thing we're trying to attain here in the city of Detroit. But everybody knows about the Ford Foundation and their new location at the train station, but they were there with us the entire way. We put together a Choice Neighborhoods application. We won that. It was a nationwide competition, and we are trying to build 850 units. And it's not just low-income housing. It's very, very low income. There's middle income. There's rental. There's for-sale product. All different types of typologies, really to make sure that we have an opportunity to keep people there and also attract folks. And Ford was at the table with us in those conversations because they know it's going to be important. If they're going to be the innovators of the future, we have to make them be in a space where we're connecting with folks from across the income spectrum. So that's one. I also would say the Detroit Housing for the Future Fund, Julie Schneider's not here, but she is currently the housing director. We worked together to put together Detroit Housing for the Future Fund when we actually had 6 corporate partners put money into this fund where we provide low interest capital for affordable housing. And so that you see that our corporate partners also believe this is important. We've been able to raise $65 million. That money is almost running out. So we're going to go out after it again. But you could see people who are coming to the table and saying this is important to us, and we want to help solve this.
So I want to just follow up on that. So they're investing money into a pool that is providing equity to housing, and they're getting a return.
That's right. It's a small return, but it's definitely a return that's lower than what you can, what we're seeing from interest rates from private banks. And so it's huge. And also I would be remiss if I did not talk about how Michigan is playing a vital role in the Corktown development project, because we have to bring low-income housing tax credits to that process, and you guys have been extremely helpful for that. But it really takes coordination amongst our private sector partners and our public sector at the state and federal level. So.
Well, I wanted to point that out because it's not a bad thing that they're coming in and they're investing in housing and getting a return, right? I like that. That's one of the things that I want to help communicate to businesses is that, there are businesses out there that are developing housing. I mentioned that earlier because they really are needing to do that to find places for their employees to live. But they're also making money off of the housing they are developing, right? And so they're developing housing because they have no choice, but it's not a loss leader. So when we're talking about how businesses can get involved in housing, we're not asking for charity, right? We're asking for investment. And I think it's important to talk about that. Investment means you have an equity stake. You are a part owner. You will get a return if all goes well, which hopefully it all goes well. So that's some of the things that we're looking at. So that's super helpful. Okay. Bob, I know you got a lot of colleagues, and as you mentioned, you're working on housing yourself. Can you tell me a little bit about what the housing is looking like that employers are investing in Northern Michigan? How are they investing?
And it's in numerous different ways, and more than anything, the business are looking for partnerships. If we can partner with the county, the townships, the different organizations up in the north. I know that Chair Public is trying threefolded. One thing is philanthropy. We're donating to every organization up there because we just need more housing experience up there, people that have done it before, and the amount of agencies that are developing up there is first and foremost. And then investments, personal investments. I think Munson Medical Center is starting to buy their own housing, and I just saw an advertisement they put out where they're going to give 1 year free housing to their nurses and a $10,000 signing bonus just to get people to come up north.
So I like that. So you have some of the traditional approaches, such as giving people housing stipends. There are certainly the bonuses. We've seen employers get involved through down payment assistance programs where they'll help provide funding to their employees to purchase within a certain area that's close to their business. We've seen businesses purchase hotels and turn them into housing, create some tiny housing. So people are trying to make it happen. I think we need to think about how we can help. And so, Jared, I want to push this question to you, talking about maybe some of the current tools that we have in the state that would incentivize businesses. But what else do we need?
It's a great question. So first, we've talked about what employers can do directly. And I'd be remiss if I didn't tell the story of Dan Gilbert moving to downtown Detroit, moving downtown because he believed that the future of his company was talent. To attract talent, I need a vibrant urban environment. He had people in office, then he realized, really attract talent, folks want to live near where they work. Young people don't just want to work downtown, they want to live downtown. And Dan got into the housing game, as a result, and we're thousands of units in with thousands more to go. I don't think that's the solution. I really don't. I think it's kind of, one-off. I'm all for, employees participating in down payment assistance programs, loan loss reserves, pooling capital, all good. I don't mean to, dissuade it in the slightest bit. I think the fundamental answer, though, to our housing issues in Michigan have to come from housing policy. state and federal housing policy. So step number one that we need to do, which we've done, is invigorate MSHDA. I can't tell you how phenomenal it is to have a permanent director of MSHDA that has dedicated her life to housing. It is a significant change from past administrations. That's number one. We need a dynamic MSHDA that pushes a forward-looking housing agenda. We have it. Big deal. Number two, we need investment from the state. At the end of the day, if housing has gone up 84%, and if it costs $375,000 to build a house, we have an inherent, implicit, inescapable workforce housing problem, right? We need state policy. We need subsidy. There's no other way around it. We need subsidy. And then you got to work within fair housing laws to make sure that your workforce housing is truly for your workforce, and there's things like that to figure out. But listen, in the budget right now, as part of the deal to invest in economic development, there was a political deal that was cut. Said, okay, we'll invest in the big, manufacturing plays, battery electric vehicles, but we're also going to put $50 million a year for housing, $50 million a year for a few years into community development. We need to make sure that that is the minimum investment in housing community development, and that it's not earmarked for pet projects, but that it is for the production of housing. That's number one. Number two, the missing middle program. We need as much money as possible into the missing middle program. That is the workforce housing program. We never invested in this. We got 50 million. We got another 50 million. Let's go.
Yeah.
And let's think about, frankly, how can we deploy that as quickly as possible, maybe thinking outside of the box and going through even directly through some regional intermediaries, maybe. But bottom line, let's fully fund as much as we can the missing middle program. LIHTC, which is typically 60% AMI and below. There's a lot of folks who have tax credits in the federal government, but they can't deliver their projects because inflation has brought up their costs 30-40%. So I think Senate Bill 7 did $100 million, $150 maybe, to supplement those projects. Let's do another round of that investment. Here's the bottom line. We have a surplus in our state budget. Probably not going to have it again. It's probably our last year of a big surplus. So the question is, what are our priorities as a state? And I would submit that investing in housing production needs to be at the top of that list. Not only is housing security fundamental to actualizing the rest of a successful life, but let's even look beyond our current population to growing our state. All the data suggests that folks who are moving across state lines and participating and contributing to the growth of a state, it's kind of common sense. They want affordable, high-quality housing in a good, safe community that is amenitized, right? If we build it, they will come. I sincerely believe, but I'll tell you this, if we don't build it, they won't come. They won't come. We need to invest in housing. This is our last year of a big surplus. What can employers do? That's the question. That's the title of this panel. I think as much as employers could do down payment assistance, invest in pooled capital funds, they can go to Lansing. They can grab somebody here when they see a state legislator, a state senator, a governor, and say priority number one for this budget. You got 4 weeks to figure out your budget, invest in housing. That's what employers can do.
Well, I'm going to just explain.
I just earned my tour pack next year.
The Missing Middle program, for folks that aren't aware of that program, it was a very flexible program that MSHDA was appropriated funds last year and some more this year, as Jared mentioned, a total of $100 million. And it provides, it's very flexible in the fact that it's housing up to 120% of area median income. So again, it kind of goes up, to workforce housing. And it's for rental, it's for home ownership, it's for rehab, it's for new construction. So it's really whatever the community needs. And at MSHDA, we came out with the second tranche of that program with $80 million. And the very first day that program opened, we got $220 million worth of applications on the very first day, right? And so it does kind of show the need, the pent-up demand for housing subsidy that is climbing up the income levels. So it's interesting that you mentioned that, but I just wanted to clarify for those of you that aren't familiar with that program what that is. So I want to ask that question to some of our other panelists, so feel free to jump in with What are the tools, what are some of the other tools that we might need in Michigan to help employers get involved in housing?
So I would echo the same thing Jared said. It really takes a policy.
Are you just wanting the claps?
Yeah, no, yeah. No, because I mean, it's very, so that's okay.
He gets them. He gets them.
It's very similar. So, and when I talk to anyone, they say, who is the largest provider of affordable housing? And they'll start naming developers and the largest developers in the state of affordable housing. And I always say it's actually regular, everyday, private individuals, right? Who live in market areas that their rents are going to be at that low income level. But there's no policy or anything that helps provide those individuals to help bring quality affordable housing and deliver that to residents, right? One of the policy changes, although it's not getting a lot of attention, is the fact that the state legislature allowed for municipalities to change the rules about pilots, which is the main tax incentive tool that affordable housing developers use in providing affordable housing, right? You're essentially taking off the tax rolls and it helps you actually finance your development, right? Now that actual legislation allows for municipalities to change that, and so I can give that to somebody who doesn't receive a LIHTC or a HUD mortgage, right? So we can expand that and provide it to other individuals, which is something that we are internally working on right now in the city of Detroit. I would also, all right, yeah. But I also would echo the part, we need money, right? We need funding, we need more vouchers, we need all of those things, right? We're dealing with people who are in poverty, right? And not necessarily can figure out their housing situation by just getting a job, right? And so we need, on a federal level, employers, right, to knock on doors to talk about allocating funds to this serious problem. The LIHTC, I would say the low-income housing tax credit, is the largest tool that we use for new affordable housing production. We've had projects stall since 2019, right before the pandemic, and we pushed the legislation that allowed for more gap financing to come and be used for some of those LIHTC projects. And if I'm not sure if you're talking about that, but I know it's been oversubscribed.
Yeah.
And MSHDA allocated the funding for those projects within a 2-month time span, right? And we were pushing for $500 million. The legislature provided 150, and we're currently trying to get another 100, right? And that's right now, what I understand in the House, it's written, but not in the Senate. So if you, just to double down on that, if you see senators, please tap on their shoulder and say, please put this money into this bill. So again, I can't, it's not only policy, but it is a serious, putting a down payment where your mouth is, right? And really getting behind it. It's the biggest, like if you're a corporation or a big business, I don't need you to figure out how to build affordable housing. What I need you to do is advocate for affordable housing, right? And the need for it.
Which brings me to a good point. First of all, if anyone has a question, you can write it on the green card and put it up. I don't know if that was mentioned at the beginning, but just in case you have a question, I think we're going to try to save a few minutes at the end. We do have another tool that's making its way through the legislature, and that's tax increment financing, allowing for housing subsidy to be a eligible activity for tax increment financing. That would be a huge win for us in the housing industry. Really puts a lot of control at the local level, because the plans would have to be approved at a local level before they would come to the state. But what I love about that tool is it's flexible. Again, it goes up to 120% of area median income, but it's also for rental, for homeowners, for rehab, for multifamily, single family. Like, it's really for whatever the locals determine their housing needs are. This tool can be used for that, and then it can come to the state, hopefully for approval for.
Oh man!
We're celebrating a little early. It hasn't passed yet. Hasn't passed yet.
But hopefully, it has passed out of the Senate. It is
Has
now,
passed the Senate.
At the House. We're very hopeful that it will get passed in June, and we'll be able to begin to use that tool. But one of the things that you said, Donald, has me wanting to ask the panel a question, and Shannon, you might be able to be really helpful with this answer, but others might as well, is you said that we don't need employers to do housing, which is right. And the employers that I've talked to that are doing housing are not doing housing because they want to do housing. They don't want to be in the housing business. But we need to be able to connect those folks with the developers that do want to do the housing so that they don't have to do the housing themselves. Like, we still want them to invest and become equity providers or guarantors, or all the different ways in which they can become involved in it, because quite honestly, we need more money and more people invested. So we do need them to get involved, but we don't need them to develop it. But Shannon and others, how do we connect them? Like, how have you found developers, and why are some people not being able to find the developers or attract the developers to their areas to do the housing?
Well, we have to remember, first of all, the corporate relocation market spends billions of dollars every year on housing mechanisms, and we can really catalyze that into our local communities. But this was our conversation with places like Invest UP, which is what type of vehicles can we have to invest in housing? And they received a legislative carve-out for ARPA funding and have created 2 funds. Most recently, they met with over 100 of their local business leaders who made their number one economic development priority housing. We need to create loan loss reserves. We need to create social impact funding. We need to create pathways where employers can invest into housing. And what we've really said is there's an opportunity to create regional funds, much like Detroit has been very successful in having a leverage fund for their housing. But we need to create regional funding in which our employers can invest into housing. We've seen the demand, we've seen the opportunities, we've had multiple corporations reach out to us that have wanted to invest, but we have not had that mechanism moving forward. And just to your point, Amy, what people need to understand is that we need programs like Missing Middle, but most of the truly impactful projects that are transformational need that leverage. We need housing TIF to be combined with Missing Middle. We need to stack complicated funding sources. We need to align all of these sources so they can work together to get these projects done. And that's policy all the way through to the vehicles that can bring in and leverage as much investment as we possibly can.
Before you go to that,
Yeah,
I'd love
go.
to answer, for the North, what do we need is we need to simplify the criteria so that more money is just eligible to go north. There's a lot of handicaps we have. We don't have water and, plumbing, like natural sewer systems and some of that stuff that makes it, a couple of checks against us. But if we, have some criteria that can overcome that, that would really help the North. And then also, the second part is just allowing and making it simple for small 5 to 10 unit developments. We can put those all in every small town in America. Here at Public, our goal is to make an apartment, 15 apartments in the next 5 years. And that's a daunting task when real estate is at such a level with building. But any money that'll help and make it simple would make a huge difference in making that for me and for so many other employees up north.
Yeah, no, and one of our questions that came in is, what are the challenges of doing rural housing? And you mentioned one of those, which is the infrastructure challenge of trying to get funding for infrastructure, because a lot of times you do have to build out the basic utilities and roads to get the housing developed, which we all know increases the cost of housing. I think another thing is something you mentioned with small projects. So a lot of our federal programs are really geared towards larger projects, right? And so really to kind of create some tools that will help fit the 10 to 15 unit housing project is tough, right? And that is one of the things that the tax increment financing would help with, because there's, that would be available for small, and like the Missing Middle, which, sorry, we have no money left in your region. So for all of you that know, we do try to, at MSHDA, with most of our resources, to spread them across the state in different regions. And some regions, are a little bit more active than other regions. So we do have some issues with trying to attract development to certain parts of our state. And part of them are rural. Shannon, you've done a lot of rural projects and are working on rural. Just to fully answer this question, what are some of the additional rural development challenges that you see?
Infrastructure, right now we're seeing, we're working in Midland in some programs, so recovery from the dam projects, septic right now, so expansion on small scale. We're looking at innovative infrastructure to catalyze different opportunities and septic. We have stormwater issues across the board. I mean, as we're starting to look at a lot of rural communities don't have really solid master plans that talk about, what is their stormwater management plan. So, I mean, a lot of basic challenges really impact how development gets done. Ultimately, it's just really capacity. There's a lot of folks that they no longer have planning departments in a lot of rural communities, so they're looking for third parties to help manage that process. They need access to tools, and they don't have access to developers there that can help walk them through what that process is.
Yeah, we see capacity issues across the state, and I know that's something that a lot of folks are trying to work on, is how do we get the capacity where it needs to be, and how do we meet communities where there are. At MSHDA, last year at this conference, we talked about the statewide housing plan. Michigan passed its first ever statewide housing plan last year. Since then, the governor has appointed the first ever statewide housing partnership to oversee the implementation of that plan. And we have created regional housing partnerships to take the statewide housing plan and kind of break it up into what works for their region. It's just like when you mentioned, Jared, you were talking about regional intermediaries and how do we get there. We know that each region isn't alike and they need different types of housing to meet their needs and different types of products. So, we're trying to think a little bit more creatively at the state, at MSHDA on, if a region can tell us what they need, can we use some of our resources to meet them where they are, rather than creating a tool and saying, got to use our tool, hope it works for you, because it doesn't work everywhere because of the size of the deal, because of the type of the deal. So, we're working really hard to do that. The regions are created. There's 15 regions across the state. If you are interested in learning about the regions, you can go to MSHDA's website, and our map is there, and the regional leads are there. And I'm just gonna, now that I have a captured audience, get involved. Have your voices heard at the region. Be involved in what those plans look like, because those plans will matter. That's where we're going to try to put a lot of our state resources to meeting those regional plans. And it kind of gets to another one of our questions that came up about the development of single-family homes. So a lot of our federal programs are geared towards multifamily, the low-income housing tax credit project or process. And it's been difficult to do a lot of single-family homes because it takes a lot more time for the same amount of impact as trying to do multifamily. And the subsidy per unit sometimes is more. And you need more capacity to get it done. So if any of you want to talk a little bit about how you have helped with single-family homes, I know certainly the city of Detroit has worked in its neighborhoods on developing new homes, fixing existing homes at the same time. It would be interesting to hear a little bit about that.
Well, yeah, so I could tell you that the city of Detroit, we won't be making its comeback without the neighborhoods. And so we need to figure out how to really take single-family homes and take a look at that product and see how we can finance it and develop it and rehab it. If the mayor was here, he would tell you about the Detroit Land Bank and the success that they had being able to sell homes in the market to private individuals, and they're fixing them up right now. But it is difficult work, and a lot of people are not getting through to the end of those development projects and making sure that they can happen. I can say that there definitely is a market. I can definitely tell you there's a desire. I have a long list of Black developers who are interested in developing their neighborhoods, but the lack of capital and other funding support prevents us from really pushing that. And so it's something that we're definitely looking at. And so we're also trying to see what we can do for new infill, not just rehabbing single family or duplexes, what have you. We're seeing where those markets conditions actually could survive, so we can actually do infill. We have a couple of areas that I think would be prosperous. But when I think of single family, I think about the neighborhoods, and it's directly impacting what we're trying to do. In my position, I also help manage the Strategic Neighborhood Fund. It's a fund that we layer different types of investment approaches to neighborhoods, and one of those are not only does it help eradicate blight, but we are trying to rehab as many single-family homes as possible, whether we're working with our city partners or our community partners, and we've been able to rehab quite a bit, almost up to 200 single-family homes in those neighborhoods. But it's going to be vital, right, to keep families here in the city of Detroit, and we thrive here in the city by our neighborhoods. So it's very important to us.
It's interesting, we at MSHDA are getting the community development block grant dollars at our agency to deploy for the development of housing. And we did a quick survey across the state over the last month or so on how should we spend the CDBG funds for housing. And the number one thing that came back was single family rehab. So I finally got some class.
Yeah.
I said, but and you know, I get it because we haven't invested enough in our state into preserving our neighborhoods. And quite honestly, it's harder to do because it takes a lot more time to do single family rehab, but it's actually more fiscally responsible to fix the housing we have than to build new, because we certainly don't need to typically invest $375,000 into investing or into rehabbing. So we're going to be looking at putting the majority of the first 20 million of that out into rehab for both homeowners and for renters, because all of the housing needs to be improved. And one of the things that I am concerned about is just the capacity for the developers to do that, because it's a lot of work to contact and work with homeowners. Yep. But also our contractors. It's hard to find small contractors to come and do that work. So we're going to have to continue to kind of work through that. But in our last few minutes, I want to get back to employers and talk about, you know, we are constantly creating new programs or changing some existing programs at the state, at MSHDA, to meet the needs and what's happening. And you know, we want to incentivize more people to get into the housing game because we need them, right? We need more resources. And so if we were looking at creating a way to incentivize employers to invest in housing, now it doesn't mean they have to own it. Again, there's lots of different ways to get them involved. What should we do? What should that program look like? I'm
happy to take a stab at it and then pass it on. You know, this discussion actually is becoming more and more to the forefront, not just here in Michigan, but in Washington. They're trying, at least in the United States Senate, to come together with a bipartisan approach to housing. And one of the thought processes is, you know, it requires subsidy. How do we route that subsidy? If we route it through the employer, maybe that's the most politically palatable. And we do that in this country, employer-provided health care, you know. So I'm not doctrinaire. I think, you know, that's definitely a way to go. I want to make one final comment, though, that gets back to your question about single-family housing. I do think this is important. Look, at the end of the day, I think 80–90% of the issue is subsidy and policy. You know, the market won't do it alone if it costs $375,000. The market doesn't do starter homes anymore, just like the autos don't build small cars anymore. The profit's in the big car, right? So you need policy, you need subsidy. I think, though, people who advocate for that, you know, are dismissive at the same time of the argument that there aren't regulatory and other things that drive up the cost of housing production. And I think it is a mistake to be dismissive of those arguments, both politically and substantively. If you look at places like California, very progressive, want to do the right thing on housing. Los Angeles had a ballot initiative to build housing for homelessness, $1 million a house it ended up costing. And it's because of this dynamic of what folks refer to as this everything bagel liberalism, where we want to achieve all of our policy goals through housing. We want to have, the most environmental, labor, this, that, and housing becomes $1 million. I think it, even though I believe 80-90% of the issue is subsidy and directing, policy, I think it's the right thing to do to take a fearless and searching inquiry as whether or not there are environmental, regulatory, permitting, zoning, other undue barriers that drive up the cost of housing. I think it'll help us politically, and if we find there's a problem, it'll help us substantively too, and we may well find there's a problem.
I think one more person can take a stab at what should we do to create a program to incentivize employers.
Listen, I love our Detroit Housing for the Future Fund. Just putting a plug on there, we're going to start our fundraising soon. Like I said, we've had many corporate partners involved in that, and so we're going to be knocking on doors. Would love to knock on a few more doors that haven't been involved in the past, but we really want to make that happen. And again, even MSHDA and I've looked at their regulatory or their legislative type of key points that they're trying to push and prioritize. I'm hoping that you guys get to see that and also echo some of those things. And when you're talking to your elected officials, you're saying that, like, let's push those legislative ideas and get behind that. And so those I think are super key, right? Because it's definitely policy and it's definitely funding. So we'll be knocking on doors for sure.
All right, any last thoughts from Shannon or Bob?
I think I said it. We definitely are promoting regional housing funds, having conversations with CDEs, CDFIs about loan loss reserves, about certainly more creative mechanisms to encourage employers to come to the table.
I'll just say that I've been patient over these 25 years on this housing issue, and I don't think we've ever been in a better position to make things happen. I'm very excited that you've taken this leadership position, Amy. You're going to make a huge difference. Your skill set coming as a business from the development side is going to make a huge difference. There's enough tools that have been shown in the rest of this country that you are aware of that you can bring here. I think maybe this panel itself, I'll say it for all of us, that I think our future looks bright. We've got a big task ahead, but we're going to make it happen.
That feels perfect to end on, right? Like, we got a lot going on. We have more resources than we have ever had in the past. We need more tools in the toolbox, and we need all of you to care and to be engaged. So thank you for coming this afternoon. Thank you.
From Delta Faucets to Behr Paint, Masco Corporation is proud to deliver products that enhance the way consumers all over the world experience and enjoy their living spaces. Masco, serving Michigan communities since 1929.
The DTE Foundation is a proud sponsor of Detroit Public TV, among the state's largest foundations committed to Michigan-focused giving. We support organizations that are doing exceptional work in our state. Visit dtefoundation.com to learn more.